Welcome back to this third and final installment of today's show of InfoWars Nightly News. Today's date is October 3rd, 2012. I'm your host, Rob Dew, and as I promised at the end of the last segment, sitting next to me is one of the leading food industry experts, Steve Shank, and he has come to talk about a whole host of issues, and so we're just going to get right to it. Steve, how's it going today?
Hey, it's good to be here.
Excellent, excellent. So we were talking earlier just about a myriad of food problems that are going on. You came in here and did 2 interviews with Alex, and you guys, I guess, scratched the surface on it, but, you know, there's so many issues involved with food because it's everywhere in our lives. It's part of everything. And we were talking about the price of bacon and what's going on with that.
You don't have to talk about the price of bacon anymore.
Yeah.
Because there ain't going to be none.
I like bacon, too.
Yeah, well, so do I. I was raised on a farm, and you have to understand that what we're getting right now is a reaction of the media, and the media is always very slow to bring out news that might reflect badly on the present administration, particularly in an election year. Mm-hmm. So if the news media is coming out and saying, guys, there's not going to be any more bacon, there's not going to be any more pork in a very short period of time because we've had this serious drought, which Alex and your whole team and I have been talking about for quite some time. Right. We're in the 7th year of this thing. But what's going to happen is a lot of times people have not realized the impact on their food budget. They all know that it's going up like crazy. They all know that 20,000 people a day in the United States are falling below the poverty line in the ability to buy their own groceries. We've got about half the population right now that needs some sort of subsidization for their grocery budget, whether it's from the church or the government or whatever source it is. And so you put that all together, and it's kind of like the old story about cooking frogs. You know, you put a frog in cold water and you turn up the heat, and by the time it gets hot enough,
it's too late.
It's too late. Yeah. And so what's happening is it's too late. And when the farm market reports come out for October, mm-hmm. which indicates what kind of crops we've got coming on this year, the news media have already picked it up and are presetting the population of the country for the fact there's not going to be any more bacon.
Yeah, they've been setting the table for this.
That's right, setting the table.
There you go.
That's not good.
No, it's not.
But anyway, the fact is that what we've got is we've got a drought. It's knocking out the corn crop, mm-hmm. a high percentage of corn crop. Some people estimate this about 70%. Well, when you look at the percentages of corn that has been allocated to ethanol to put in our gas tank,
mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
that's what? That's 40%. Okay, you got another 40%. That's what? Left for animal feed, and right. 20% for people.
Yeah.
Well, what folks don't realize is that portion that goes for animal feed is what provides their poultry and all their livestock, because that's animal feed that is being restructured away from our food supply. So the pork is just the beginning. You've got to understand, when you get into third world countries, what they grow is not beef. They aren't growing large quantities of dairy cattle and this type of thing. When you've got the little farm that's just barely surviving, that's just barely making it, they raise hogs and chickens. You can fatten out a hog in one season and get it ready for market. It's going to take a couple seasons to get a head of beef up to speed. So the pork is indicative of the protein source of a country going down and down and disappearing. And when the news media comes out, and they're already at the point where they're saying there isn't going to be any, or people will definitely not be able to afford it, what happens to those families that are falling below the poverty line every day in this country when we've got 50 million people on food stamps, and that doesn't count all of the people that are getting subsidization of their food budget out of other places?
Right.
So we've got some serious stuff going on.
Oh, and protein is one of the main sources of food that you need. And they make the USDA pyramid, which shows lots of carbohydrates, which, you know, that's really not what you need more of. You need protein, fruits, and vegetables, and mainly protein and vegetables.
Well, and the interesting thing is that as a result of this, as a result of the families that are losing ground with being able to afford the protein sources, what they're going for is high percentages of carbohydrates in their diet, and so their balance is off. And that's why you can measure a high percentage of the population's butts and axe handles. And at the same time, we've got some key people in the White House that are saying we have to do something about the weight of our country, and we need to monitor what people are eating so that we can deal with this weight problem, this health problem, because it's going to affect our health care program. And we've got 17 pages in the health care program that addresses what people can and cannot eat. And all of this is counterproductive.
Oh, yeah.
You bring the people to an economic level where they can't afford the food, and so they go to carbohydrates, their butts get wide, and then you complain about the fact that they're having health problems with all the diabetes and all these types of things, and it's going to affect the health care program. And so we don't want to charge you for everybody's health care that's fat. And so where does it all end?
Right. Well, yeah, I tell you where it ends. It ends in the trash can. We just covered a story today how the kids aren't eating the vegetables that they're being given at school, or I guess they're paying for. And so they want to put cameras on the trash cans to see what type of food they're throwing away. I mean, it's just, the nanny state has just gotten out of control. And you know, there's one mother there that they interview, and she says, well, you know, it's not the school's job to make these kids eat. It's the parents' job to feed these kids properly. So when they get to school, they're eating the things. I mean, let's not even get into the school problem as it is now, but just the whole notion that it's the government's job. They think they have to control everything all along the way. And like you said, they're going to get into this food issue when there's no food around. What are they going to do?
Well, the interesting thing is that the government doesn't have any food reserves. Absolutely none. Now, a lot of people assume that the government is going to feed them. Where does the food come from that the government feeds them with? It's not coming from the government. They don't have any food reserves. So what's going to ultimately happen is that the people right now who can afford their food are paying dearly for it. The people who can't afford the food, that food is being channeled over to the people, and who's paying for it? I think we were talking before we came on this program about the fact that right now every person in the country is being charged to give the people who can't afford them cell phones.
Obama phones. They're
phones.
everywhere.
Yeah,
you know, and that comes right out of your universal fee that you pay to the government and everybody's cell phone bill. And you know, people aren't the wiser. They don't know. They just, oh, it's $3. Well, that's $3 from every cell phone customer.
Yeah.
And where does it end, though? You know, do we need to give everybody free airplane tickets too?
So who's paying for it?
Exactly, we are.
The ones that work hard enough to stay ahead of the system.
Right.
Now, let me ask you this. If the government doesn't have any food, there's no food reserve, and they've committed themselves with all of the people on food stamps that they're encouraging to get on food stamps before the election, obviously. And
so they're eating so they can go vote.
You don't have to scream for very much transparency to wonder why everybody's being given food stamps before the election.
Right.
It doesn't take much transparency to know why everybody's being given phones that can't afford them before the election. I mean, connect the dots, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
Okay, but you put this together. If you're aggravated as you look at your phone bill and say, oh, well, it's another $3, but you multiply it by the number of people that are paying for their phones, and some of them are struggling to pay for those phones because they need them to function. If you think that's aggravating to people, what's going to happen when those who are able to pay for the food, no matter how expensive it is, as it starts to disappear, find out that in order to feed the people that have been committed to that they will be fed, the food from these large supplies of food out here in the country is being taken from those who can afford it to give to those who are already on the system. So when the breadline starts and no one can afford food, guess who's going to be standing there? The people who are prudent enough to have their savings account, that were prudent enough to set aside a little bit of gold, that were prudent enough to have a retirement program, the disabled veterans with their meager little checks. And these people will be standing in line to get the food that they have been willing to pay for behind the people that are mandated to have the food that doesn't happen to go into the gas tanks
Of the cars. Yeah.
that we drive, that we can't afford to buy the gas to go to the grocery store to buy the food that we can't afford.
Exactly. And how's the government going to do it? They're going to executive order. They've already made these executive orders. They've been changed as they go through. We covered it in Police State 4. They have the ability to confiscate farm equipment, farms, food stocks, and they will just warehouse it all. And they will come in. They might even come into your business by government order with trucks and just start backloading it in there. And then hey, are you going to pay me for this food? Oh no, this is executive order. This is what you have to do.
Well, that particular executive order that you're talking about is a retreading of the executive order that we were all appalled at back a few years ago when Mr. Clinton signed that first executive order. Now it's just been kind of refurbished and re-edited and brought back out.
They call it reauthorization.
Oh,
we're going to reauthorize this and change a couple sentences here and mainly make it more totalitarian and shove it back in your face. That's how.
Well, let me tell you about a ladder. There's a ladder of human existence. When a baby is born, okay, it starts out, and what's the one function it has? What's job one for that baby? Everything that baby comes in contact with goes in the mouth, right?
Right.
Okay. What's the difference between that baby and someone who has just lost their job, or someone who is the recent victim of a national disaster or a natural disaster? What's the difference between that baby and a too much in debt yuppie executive that is just on a survival mode? The first rung of the survival ladder has to be food. And until that is taken care of, what we have is a situation where nobody can do anything. Now, let me give you some perfect examples. That's not just in this country. If you look at slavery, if you look at the feudal system, if you look at sharecroppers, and if you look at a totalitarian government that controls its people, what do they all control it with? Yeah. They control those people with food. If you can keep everyone at just the survival mode so that every waking hour...
On the brink of starvation.
Every waking hour is totally committed to just providing the food for that day. We've seen this happen in many of the Iron Curtain countries and all of the stuff. You see the poverty that's the result of taking from the rich and giving to the poor, and all this equalization so that everybody is equalized at a survival level so that they can't go to the next step. What's the baby do? It's on that bottom rung, hanging on for dear life, eating. Until that's taken care of, if that baby is standing in the crib crying for food, they aren't going to get to the point where they think. They aren't going to get to the point where they have emotions, where they start to have feelings and start to learn. They're going to stay right there until they get that solved.
And that's where the government wants you. That's where they like you. They don't want you questioning the system.
Rob, I'm not even going to say that. I'm just going to let all of your viewers draw their own conclusion.
All right.
That baby, that out-of-work engineer, that mom that's that single mom that's just trying to feed her 3 kids, and that disaster relief individual, they're all at the same spot. No matter where they climbed on the level of human progression and their development as an individual, to their creativity, to maximize their capability as a human being, whenever one of those situations hits, boom, they go right straight down to that bottom rung.
Right.
And that's where people no longer have the choice to think and feel and fight to retain their liberties and freedoms and become who they're capable of becoming.
Yeah.
They are literally at the survival level, and that's where people have to be to be controlled.
Going back to that, I read a book, and it's basically children's accounts of the Pol Pot regime, growing up in that they were, between the ages of 7 and 12. And they were brought into these camps, and they were forced to grow food. They were given a meager supply of rice. They were eating bugs. They were eating each other. It was truly horrifying to think, but they were on that one rung of the ladder, whereas before, their parents were, intelligent professors, doctors, whatever. They went into these towns, and just anybody who was smart, shoot the parents immediately, take the kids, put the kids in the fields. And it's scary to think that could happen here at some point, and that people will be scrambling for food because as a result of a natural disaster, government collapse, a rolling situation complex of a lot of different things. I mean, it could be anything.
Let's take the ladder again.
Yeah.
Let's take the ladder again. 20,000 people a day in America are falling below the poverty line.
Right.
That means that you have people that have been, 5 years ago, were considered successful and doing well and prospering, and they had time to go play some golf, to go play softball, and do the various things that they do, and pretty soon that economic creeping, insidious cancer climbs up that ladder. And as each person is caught up with, in other words, as the economy failing catches up, we've got 20,000 people a day that are going from wherever they were on their ladder of progression, falling all the way down and grabbing hold of that bottom rung and hanging on, and they're at the point where the only thing that they can think of, the only thing that they can do, they aren't going to think about, how is my freedom being challenged? Had I better go down and do something about that, that congressman that voted the wrong way? No, they don't give a rat's butt about any of that stuff, because they're hanging on the bottom line rung of that ladder. And so what you've got is exactly going on in a more sophisticated, mundane way that doesn't seem so atrocious as the story about the children that you just told. But the fact is, it's happening to grown adults and full families daily in this country, because no matter how far we're up on the ladder, when that juggernaut that's rolling toward us and rolling over us catches up with you, you're down to that bottom rung. And it doesn't make any difference what you did yesterday, the day before, how successful you were, how much education you've got. We've got kids coming out of school, graduating at high levels within their classes, that can't find jobs because there are no businesses left to give them the jobs to work. And so where are they? They are no better off.
They're in debt.
Than the guy that's standing on the street corner, propped against his crutch, with a cardboard sign painted in his wife's lipstick that says, "A little bit of change will help." How much difference is there between that man and the baby in the crib and the mother that's feeding her children and those of us that are falling below that line? So here's the deal. If pork is disappearing, that's only the tip of the iceberg. When we get done dealing with what's going on in this 7th year of the worldwide famine in this country, where we have a food situation we've never experienced or imagined before, the only chance that people have is to put in a supply of food while they can still afford it, because the food that you're buying right now, the only reason you can still afford it is because it was purchased by the processors from last year's crop that they could still afford to buy the raw materials.
Right.
When those processors hit the October of this year and November of this year new pricing on the current raw materials, it's going to be a whole different ballgame. And you think that 20,000 families a day or individuals a day falling below the poverty line is serious? You ain't seen nothing yet.
Yeah.
It's going to be about as insane as the idea that $3 off of your phone bill is going to provide somebody a phone. And who's paying for the services month to month? I don't know about that. We better check that out. If that aggravates you, $3 worth of aggravation, think about when all of these people that can't afford to buy food, that have been committed to that they'll be provided food, when your food is taken out of those huge warehouses and redistributed, and you're standing in the bread line behind
the people who already know the system.
The members have already,
exactly.
the people are already members of the system, and so you've got just a really interesting situation.
Yeah.
So
I am not looking forward to it. It's sad that it's come to this. It really feels like we're looking over the edge of the abyss at this point.
But here's the law. Here's the law that some of the people that are preparing, what do they call them? The
preppers?
Preppers, yes, the preppers. Some of these wise people that are preparing realize something. Here's a fact. If we do not learn from history, we are condemned to repeat it. The fact is, throughout the history of mankind, good times have been followed by bad times, which are always, fortunately, followed by good times again. And so many people right now are complacent that the juggernaut of economic disaster and cancer haven't hit yet. While they're sitting there in their complacency, it's climbing up the economic ladder, and as the people are falling down to that bottom rung, it reminds me of a cartoon I saw one time. It was a bunch of sheep, and they were going toward a cliff, and they were falling over the cliff. And they had all these stricken looks on their faces as they fell off the cliff. And there was one little black sheep right in the middle that had a cartoon bubble above it that said, it was pointed the other direction, that said, "Excuse me, excuse me, excuse me." And you see, there are few people in this country, there are millions of them, but relative to the population, there are few people that realize that if we take control of our dependencies right now, while we still can, and get a supply of food, put in a supply of food, and work to be able to eke out whatever we can to set aside some food right now that's storable, then they have a chance to survive. The people who do not pay attention, when these prices hit this year on raw materials, and they start to trickle down through the processing of the foods to the point where it shows up in the grocery store at the price that you're going to have to pay just to keep that processor in business. They have to stay alive.
Yeah.
We think 20,000 families dropping below the poverty line is ridiculous. You ain't seen nothing yet.
And can you imagine 20,000 families? I think there's 4 people in that family. That's, 80,000 people a day. It's scary because that's the size of a small to medium-sized city.
There you go.
Every day in America.
Yeah.
And there's nobody out, Obama is providing them food stamps to keep them happy until this election. Then what happens at the end of the year, and he decides to either jerk the food stamps away, or the prices climb so high where the food stamps don't buy anything.
There you go.
You got 2 scenarios.
Something that a lot of times people don't realize is you can stand there all day long. Back when we had phone booths, you can stand in a phone booth all day long with 24 cents. And the point that I'm making is, you can stand in a bread line. If you have to pay for food, you can stand in that line to get the food, and if your money isn't enough to buy the food, then you might as well not have any money at all.
Yeah.
And so what we've got is a situation in macrocosm similar to the one you described with the children. We haven't discovered it yet. We're just the frogs in the cool water that's getting pretty hot for 20,000 families a day, or individuals a day, I should say. Okay, it's getting pretty hot for those folks. But if you think that $3 on your phone bill is an aggravation, and it's unfair, and you might even feel like it's stealing from you, can you imagine what you're going to feel like if you're still employed and you end up in a bread line and there's no food?
And how many major supermarket chains are there now? Maybe 10, 11 in the country?
Yeah.
And they're all, who's on their list, their call list. They say, hey, we need you to start shipping over to this place, this Walmart Supercenter, and we're going to keep the food here and then distribute it out. That's when it's going to get controlled, and they've got that situation. It's all centralized.
Yeah.
All centralized all over the country.
Well, the problem that we have is, they say that people get the government that they deserve. I'm not going to go into that one.
Yeah.
But they also say, my daddy was 96 when he died, and about 2 years before that, he already had discovered that I was in this insane thing called the food industry. And he said, son, he was born in 1887. We skipped a generation. He said, son, the problem we've got, I've been through 2 depressions, what they call the Great Depression and the one before that. Mm-hmm. The problem we've got right now, and this was 20, 30 years ago, the problem that we got right now is that we've had it too good for too long.
You get comfortable.
The problem that we're going to have is before we get enough families in this country with a 2x4 of reality across their foreheads, we're going to have to sink so low that the masses that are buying into this idea that it's all free, and those rich guys, do you realize, we did some calculations the other day, which is interesting. 1/8 of the population of this country is supporting the entire country. I can prove it. We can go through that. We don't have time right now.
Wow.
1/8. You're one of them. I'm one of them. And we've got a lot of good people out there that are listening to us that are part of that. These still employed. Mm-hmm. But when you consider half the population in some way or other works for the government, half the population in some way or other is being supported for their groceries. I mean, you put
there's not another half left.
Yeah, you run out of halves pretty soon.
Yeah.
So the message is very simple, Rob. People have to realize they have to look in the mirror when they get up in the morning. I know that there are a lot of people that won't. They're just great. They say, boy, all I want is my telephone. I'm going to vote for that man. Mm-hmm. All I want is to make sure that I can get my food stamps, and I'll vote for that man. But there are some of us who realize that that's going to go down the tubes, and we've got a historical experience of how long it takes to get back once we give up all of our freedoms and we are bought. Mm-hmm. And that was the Israelites in their slavery to Egypt. Took them 400 years to get out of it. And everybody talks about Joseph, the great storer. Mm-hmm. Very simply, after he stored for 7 years, they got to the first year, and all the Egyptians came around. They said, hey, we ain't got no food. And they said, got any money? Mm-hmm. They gave them all their money. Second year, hey, we ain't got no food. You got any cattle? That means all their livestock, mm-hmm. not just cattle. Gave them all their cattle. Third year came around, they said, hey, we ain't got no food. The only thing we got left is our land and ourselves.
Thank you.
And in the 47th verse, it says, I have bought you this day and your land for the Pharaoh. Now you tell me how far we are from that statement being made here in the United States. Mm-hmm. I have bought you this day. And from the time that they were bought, it took them 400 years to get enough people who could get enough food in their belly so they could start to think and start to feel and start to say, wait a minute, this stinks, and actually rebel and get away from the system. 400 years. And they didn't have the control mechanism back then that systems have nowadays.
No, they didn't have unmanned drones flying over, ready to kill people. They didn't have our telephones tracking us.
Well, there you go.
They didn't have the TV pushing messages constantly, or the food stamps, or anything else. So, wow. So I guess your best advice then is to get food, get it now before it goes up, essentially.
Doesn't take brain surgery, Rob. Doesn't take brain surgery. All it does is take someone with ears to hear and eyes to see, and listen to what Alex and you guys are putting out, and just stop and think. Mm-hmm. Stop and think. Where are you? You're following your dreams and your hopes and your wishes, but any one of these circumstances that we listed here earlier will put you right back down on that bottom rung. And when you're there, there's no other thought. And the problem is that people think that there's a free lunch, and there's always a price tag to everything.
Yeah.
So when we look in the mirror in the morning, All we can say is it's not up to them to take care of us because there's a price tag. You ask any family that's gone on welfare, any of the welfare programs, and see what they have to sign away.
Is it worth it? Ask them if it's worth it.
Ask them if they dare make more than a certain amount of money, if they try and pick themselves up by their bootstraps, if they dare make too much money, then they'll lose what they've got. So they don't dare progress.
Or if they're a single mother, if they get married, oh, we're going to take it away. You know, so it keeps them in that, it keeps them right in the box.
There you go, right in the box. Hanging on to the bottom rung of that ladder until you get that rung taken care of, you ain't going to climb no further.
Yeah.
But here's the way that we deal with it. We look in the mirror in the morning and we say to ourselves, if it is to be, it's up to me, because freedom is never free.
Amen to that. We didn't even get to your book. That's coming out this year, the end of the year.
That's okay.
And the title of it is "It's Not Your Fault," and it's going to come out what, November or January? That was amazing.
Yeah,
I hope you end it with that statement, because if it's up to me, what is that again?
If it is to be.
If it is to be,
it's up to me.
That's
freedom
great.
is never free.
That's it. Wow. Steve Shank, better words have never been said, and let me tell you, that was very informative. I hope you got something out of that out there watching this show. This was a little unexpected. Steve showed up today. He was in some travels, and this was one of the rungs on his travels through the United States. Basically, he's going around warning people, you know, get your bed prepared, because whenever it comes down, you don't want to be the one standing in that breadline, because then you're at the mercy of the people who are basically controlling the ladder, and they're going to knock you down. So with that, we're going to end today's October 3rd, 2012 show. Thanks to Steve Shank, Amber Lyon, and the rest of the crew. It's an interesting day today. We sent all the reporters out, so we're going to have a whole bunch of new stories that we're going to be putting out in the next couple days, and it's really good to be able to send reporters out and work on the show at the same time and not feel too crazy, too much like a chicken with your head cut off. And but we're getting it done. Big thanks to Marcos out there and John Bound, and who helped me put the show together. And with that, we will see you tomorrow. Once again, if you want to subscribe, you can go to prisonplanet.tv. We have a 15-day free trial. It's less than $6 a month, and you can share your passcode with 5 other friends. So that little graphic that popped up was really, it kind of explains it all. And then you guys can get the information, spread it out to your circle, and therefore we can all pull ourselves up this ladder of life and you know, truly make it a country and a place and a society that we want to live in, and where everybody can succeed. And if they want to, you know, they have to look in the mirror, though, and make it happen, because nobody's going to make it happen for you. We'll see you tomorrow. Good night.